Ever since the rise in popularity of the Roe Margot, many have asked, including one of you guys, how does the Roe compare to Hermes? And as a collector of both, I'd like to think I'm somewhat qualified to answer this question. And hi, if you're new here, my name is Elaine, and on my channel, I like to talk about bags from mid-range to vintage luxury. And if you're returning, thank you so much for your support and viewership. And so without further ado, let's dive into it. And so I've decided to break this video down into 5 categories. So I'm going to start with construction, talking about the construction of both bags, and then the quality of leather and hardware. Then I talk about usability, how functional are their bags, durability and aftercare, and lastly, resale value. And so starting off with construction, so as many of you guys probably already know, Hermes is hand stitched, not 100% and not for every bag, but definitely for their Birkins and Kellys and for their exotics. And many of their other bags are a combination of hand stitched and machine stitched, with the hand stitched parts being more of the parts that need a little bit more durability. Those are usually saddle stitched, which is stitched by hand. And the nice thing about saddle stitch is that if one stitch goes, all the other stitches will hold. It's sort of like each stitch is knotted into the bag. As opposed to basically every other brand, they make all their bags with machine stitching. So that includes the Roe. You know, Hermes is really the only one left in the luxury sector that does hand stitching. Of course, there are some one-offs like artisans that will do custom bespoke hand stitched bags, but we're talking about like basically the big fashion houses here or luxury brands, then, you know, Hermes is the only one. So the Roe is predominantly machine stitched in a factory in Italy, probably one of the top factories really, because their construction is always very clean, very nice. And then they do hand stitch basically the parts that need a little bit of reinforcement. So whether that's on the handles, mostly there's some reinforcing hand stitching, which is actually very common in other luxury brands as well. So the Roe is not the only one that does that. Stitching is always very straight, very clean, very neat for the Roe, as well as Hermes. So I guess in terms of when you look at the details, they are fairly similar, but this round definitely goes to Hermes for being the only brand that does hand stitching. But of course, you know, on the flip side of that, that means the price of the bag will be a lot more. Hermes is really in a category of its own because of the time that they take to make these bags, because of the saddle stitching that they use. Quality of leather and hardware. So I'm no expert. Of course, I love bags. I've seen a lot of bags. A lot of bags have come through my collection, and I've had maybe, you know, 20 plus years of collecting, but I don't make bags. I have no expertise in this arena, so I do rely on what I learn off of the internet. I did some research, and one of my sources is a leather bag maker in Japan. Their YouTube channel is called Shinshin Kobo, and so I have linked it down below, especially a video that they recently put out, which is about looking at the Roe Margot. It was really interesting because they had actually reviewed the Roe Margot, I think it was a 15 size, 2 years ago. And at the time they did say, you know, quality materials, quality construction, but they didn't really understand how it was priced so high. And then 2 years later, he actually said, oh, the pricing was fairly good for what you got. So I think having seen maybe how luxury brands have really raised their prices without any sort of increase in quality, kind of revised his conclusion. I'm going to quote them pretty much. When he looked at the Roe Margot, he did say it was probably made in a factory in Florence called Scandici, which I guess is like the top of the top. So, you know, construction is impeccable, straight lines, you know, very clean, very neat. And then he did talk about their leather choice, and their leather choice is also top of the line. Of course, he said when it comes to Hermes, you can't really compare because Hermes has been in the business for hundreds of years versus the Roe has only been in for like 20 some, right? So you really can't compare sort of the deep pockets that Hermes has. So for a 20-year-old brand, you know, they're sourcing the best leather that they can find, which of course isn't going to be the same as the best leather that a 100-year-old brand or 100-plus-year-old brand can source. And of course, Hermes also has a larger variety of leathers that they use. So this one's Evercolor, that one back here is Swift, you know, there's Box, there's Togo, there's Clemence, there's Epsom. There's a ton, versus I feel like the row is trying to pick the best, and what they find is usually in some sort of pebbled leather, maybe some saddle leather. They don't have the variety. Of course, they're not as big of a fashion house as Hermes, but for what they do choose, it is some of the best. And then I'll also put Tanner Leatherstein's video down below where he talks about suede in particular, and how he said some of the best suede he's ever seen was used in the bags from the row. I think when it comes to quality of the leather and even their hardware, it is some of the best within the luxury realm, and it is probably the best that the row can do as a 20-year-old brand. As a leather lover, bag lover, I have to say, when you touch a bag from the row, it really does feel eons better than a lot of these other luxury brands. I feel like a lot of people fall in love with the row because once they feel it, and they feel both the exterior and the interior, they really just fall in love, you know? I should also mention that in the Shinshin Kobo video, a lot of the details in the construction of the row bags are also basically the gold standard in the industry. You know, they'll take the time to construct the bag so that, one, like, you can't see the handles sewn on the interior of the bag. You know, everything that's sewn in the exterior is, then there's an interior lining that you wouldn't be able to see it. On top of that, the zippers are covered with leather so that you can't see the zipper hardware. So it's like the little details, one, does drive up the price of the bag, of course, but also makes it so that I feel like maybe if you really know bag construction, these are the things that you would see, you know, but as a regular consumer, you don't normally notice it. For me, I'm always usually just won over by the leather quality and the feel of it. Of course, you know, Hermes, again, will beat out the row in terms of leathers and hardware. Again, they have over 100 years of experience. For the most part, I think the row is smart in that they don't use a lot of hardware usually. Tanner Leatherstein once said, you know, hardware is actually sometimes more than the cost of the leather and the construction. It's really where a lot of the money goes, especially if you want to use quality hardware. So I think the row in general chooses not to use a lot of hardware to keep the bag sort of in their minimal aesthetic. This India bag does have a lock. It's actually fairly light. Like when you compare it to a lock from an Hermes bag, those locks are usually quite heavy. I think a lot of the reviews that you see about the row, even if the reviewer doesn't buy the bag themselves, they will comment, you know, if they're looking at it in the store and they're trying it on, they'll comment that a lot of these bags are very light in weight compared to the size, and you know, they're a lot lighter than you think they would be. And I think part of that is a conscious choice by the row, and I think that feeds into the next topic here, talk about usability. In this category, I will give the win to the row, actually, because I think in terms of usability, they really think it through as much as possible, lighter in weight than a lot of Hermes bags. To me, a lot of Hermes bags are heavier than expected. Granted, they use a lot of hardware, you know, that's their forte, but that does make the bag very heavy and, in my opinion, less usable. I've tried a lot of Hermes bags. You know, I'm not really a Birkin gal. I like Kelly's, sure, and I've had a Constance before, but I've tried a lot of other different styles. And I would say of all the bags that I tried, maybe 20 to 30% are really functional. The toolbox is definitely one of them. But a lot of bags that Hermes makes, they're not like super functional bags. They're not really known for that. I don't think they think about it too much because they don't really have to think about it. I mean, people will buy bags because it's Hermes, because of the quality probably, and you know, construction. The row does put some time thinking about the design and usability of a bag. And you can see like Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen, you know, the founders of the row, they do use their own bags, and so they test drive it, of course, but they're functional. Of course, some more than others. So one thing I don't like about the row bags, I'll have to say, is that they like to use skinny straps. Not a fan of skinny straps because, one, I like to carry a lot of things, and so when you have a skinny strap, you're going to end up putting a lot of pressure on your shoulder. I'm also not a top handle only gal, so it's really hard for me to use a lot of the row bags that are just top handle only. I think in terms of like the best designs, honestly, is, you know, for me, it's like brands like Songmont, very usable. I think in terms of usability kind of beats out both Hermes and the Row, but of course Songmont is a mid-range brand, and so quality is not going to be comparable to Hermes and the Row. But if you want to talk about just straight usability, other brands out there have them beat. But I think if comparing the two, I honestly will vote for the Row. It's very subjective. You can definitely vote for Hermes as well. It really depends on what bag you have in mind. And hi, if you're still watching and maybe if you've seen some of my other videos in the past, I kindly ask that you consider subscribing since it really helps support this channel. Thank you. Next is durability and aftercare. So as you know, Hermes is famous for their aftercare. I've actually used the Hermes Spa multiple times, and so I did do a video of it here. The nice thing about Hermes, and is very unique to Hermes, is that they will fix their bags indefinitely. Unfortunately, the Row does not have any aftercare service, and I feel like if they ever did spin up some sort of service like that, they would actually be a lot more competitive to Hermes. Instead, I think they work on providing quality construction. One of the remarks in the Shinshin Kobo video was that, you know, the leather edging on the Row bags tend to be very thick. So maybe put it down here, you can see. And that, you know, is multiple coats of the leather edging. And that's to improve durability versus if you look at some of the edging for Hermes, they tend to be a little bit lighter. I mean, one, to me, it looks aesthetically a little bit more pleasing. But two, I think they can get away with that because if something should happen, if it needs to be re-edged, the person could easily take it into the Hermes spa, get it redone, which I've also done before too with a Birkin that I sold. Leather edging on the handles were totally gone and they just redid it and it was good as new. The Row kind of weighs their options and decides to try to make their bags a little bit more durable so that they don't have to worry about aftercare, versus Hermes will maybe do it more for aesthetic, but then they know they have this aftercare service. It depends. And so, I mean, I think if you don't have an Hermes boutique near you and you are the type to wear your bag to death, then the Row might be a better option. Of course, if that's your aesthetic too, you know, they're kind of different in terms of design and visuals, you know, they're not the same category really. So if you have the Hermes boutique near you, then the Hermes is a great option because it's very easy to take it in for repair. I think this round will still have to go to Hermes. Me personally, I do live somewhat near a Hermes boutique, so having that aftercare service is pretty key. It allows me to buy really old beat up bags and get them spot and then they get a second life. You know what I mean? So I have seen the Row bags eventually break down, eventually need repair. And I think in that case, you could just take them to a repair shop. Usually shoe repair places are pretty good. They know how to like stitch up the leather and such. I don't know if they do leather edging. Oh, but I do have to mention that, you know, the Row is actually really big in Japan. They have been for quite a while. I think even before the US really got into it, before the Margot got big, people in Japan have really gone crazy over the Row. And I think part of that is because of the aesthetic and the quality of the construction and the materials. But anyways, my point is I've seen a lot of videos and I've experienced it myself firsthand, is that the Row will not stay pristine. Like that's not the purpose of their bags. Their bags are kind of meant to be used to the point where they develop their own characteristics, personality. In Japan, it's aji, or like flavor. It molds to the user. And I think for the most part, they do stand up. A lot of the In My Bag videos from Japan, especially the ones that are from the magazine YouTube channels, you know, a lot of these writers, editors, so on and so forth, will use their Row bag as their daily carry, especially, you know, they'll add their laptops. And, you know, people in Japan carry a lot because a lot of them commute by train and they work really long hours. And you can see that the bag isn't pristine. It has developed a flavor and a personality, but they're still holding up. In some cases, for those who like the patinaed look, it looks actually better than some sort of sterile, pristine, say Birkin or Kelly. It really is personal preference But again, I will still vote Hermes on this round because of the aftercare service. And then last but not least, I'm going to talk about resale value. So overall, yes, you know, Hermes wins on a lot of fronts, but that's because one, they're way more expensive, and two, they're hundreds of years of being in the business. You know, the Rose, 20 years, and they're doing the best they can for 20 years in the business. But also price-wise, they're actually, I know everyone's like, oh, the Rose are overpriced for what it is, but hear me out. So I think for what it is, yes, it leans on the higher side, but I think when you compare it to all the other conglomerate brands, the, you know, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Dior, the pricing on the row is actually, don't come after me for this, but it's relatively reasonable because of the materials that they use. I mean, they're using the best that they can get their hands on. The construction is, you know, by the top factories. This was 30, so right now this is 3,600. I bought it a little bit less in Japan. For 3,600, you can get like a little Zipango from Hermes. For 3,600 at Louis Vuitton, and a lot of them are canvas. It's not even leather, and they're not like lambskin lined. And even Loewe, you can't even get a puzzle for 3,600 anymore. Yes, I think compared to other brands, I think the row pricing isn't ludicrous. I think if you're just looking at it and you're like, I could buy this off of Amazon for $100. Yeah, sure. You know, you could for the same sort of look. I don't know about the longevity and such, but from far away, like no one's going to be able to tell the difference. The thing that the row wins people over with is the touch. It's like you can't really get the feel of this unless you maybe go to Hermes. Maybe Loewe sometimes, you know, some of their lambskin stuff, but then at that price point, it's actually way more than what the row is selling things for. Sorry, a little bit of a tangent. I was supposed to talk about resale value, but I think right now I'm just talking about value, I guess, in terms of price. I do think the row wins on that. If you talk about resale, I think it really fluctuates, the Birkin Kelly constants. Of course, those quota bags, you're going to be able to sell it for more than what you bought it for. But if you factor in the time and the pre-spend that you need to do to be able to get a quota bag, basically double the price of what you're actually paying for when you buy the bag. Again, I still think the resale value is with the row. I don't think you're going to get more than what you paid for most of the time, unless you're, you know, talking about the Margot at its peak, which I don't know if that's something that the row can repeat. But I do think percentage-wise, what you get back, of course, depends on the style, depends how new the item is, and of course the condition. I do think the row wins on this. But yeah, it really depends. I do resell my Hermes bags, the vintage ones that I get. I would say because I buy it secondhand, I buy it old, and I also do like to clean it up myself, I do end up not losing money. And then the times that I have purchased the row, for the most part, maybe half the times I would lose money. If I lose money, I lose a lot of money. So, ooh, I don't know. I would say that's a draw. I think now if I were to sell this East West India bag, it's sold out. It's hard to get. I see one on Fashion File for $6,000, which is ridiculous, by the way. They paid the person $3,000 or so. And so if I bought this for $3,200 tax free and I were to sell it to the Real, I don't think I would take a loss on this. Not to say I'm not selling it though, so don't, I love it. I love this bag. I'm going to be using it, but I think overall, yeah, resale value, I would say they're equal. So in conclusion, I mean, Hermes won on a lot of fronts. Again, I said because they are a long-standing heritage brand. I think as a newcomer, the row is doing really well. It is kind of holding their own when it comes to other luxury brands. And I think a lot of leather lovers are willing to spend for the row because the quality is there. It sometimes bothers me when I see other YouTubers judge the row when they haven't purchased anything from the row. They kind of just judge it from the looks, or maybe they'll even go in store and kind of like look at it and pick it up. but they have no idea how it wears. And I think the beauty of the row is in how it wears and how it gets its flavor. And so like even this India bag, it's starting to look a little bit like the Agnes here. If you can see, it has a little bit of a dip. And I mean, some people might call that a flaw, but I think I would say that's interesting. That makes it different. And the thing is then, you know, I can compare this with other East-West India owners and maybe their bags don't look this way. Maybe they've put in an organizer, or maybe it looks even worse. Maybe it's even more scrunched. Each bag develops its own characteristic and really becomes that person's bag. And I've bought a lot of secondhand items from the row, mostly from Japan because it's so big there, and so I can find some deals sometimes. So I went through a whole park tote thing, and so I have a blog post here. My very first park tote was from Brandoff in Japan. I bought it in person and it was super slouchy. It felt like it lived its whole life already with somebody else, and I was the second owner. And I loved it. It was much smoother and softer than this bag is because patinaed, it had been beat up, but none of the stitching was fraying. It was fully functional. And in the end, when I bought this one, I did end up letting go the black one. And, you know, now it's living a third life. I mean, I think for people who love leather and love vintage, love patina, the row is a really good option. Anyways, I think that's it for me today. Let me know if you have any questions, or, you know, I welcome differing point of views. I understand. I feel like sometimes complimenting the row is a little controversial. Please be civil, and I ask for kindness and trying to understand multiple points of views when commenting down below. But let me know what you think, and if you found this interesting, I kindly ask that you give it a like or subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye.